They said the border was secure. They told you the military was the last line of defense. They were wrong. And what federal investigators uncovered inside Fort Carranza, Texas, in the early hours of a Tuesday morning in March was not just a scandal. It was not just corruption. It was a deliberate, calculated surrender of American soil, organized from within a United States military installation, authorized by a 2-star general, and executed for the benefit of the most violent drug trafficking organization on Earth, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Ching. 17.9 tons of fentanyl, enough to kill every man, woman, and child in the United States 12 times over, seized not from a cartel warehouse on the Mexican side of the border, not from a smuggler's tunnel, not from a narco mansion in the desert, seized from inside a United States Army base. 59 soldiers arrested in a single operation. Active duty. Uniformed. Sworn to protect this country. This is not negligence. This is engineered treason, and it goes deeper than you are ready to hear. 4:17 a.m. Fort Carranza Military Installation, Laredo Sector, South Texas. The temperature was 41 degrees. A low fog rolled off the Rio Grande and pushed across the floodlit perimeter of the base like a curtain being slowly drawn back. There were no unusual sounds, no alarms, no indication that anything was wrong. That was exactly how they planned it. Over 200 FBI special agents, DIA strike teams, and ICE enforcement units had been staging in a civilian warehouse 9 miles east of the base for the previous 11 hours. They wore dark tactical gear with no base insignia. They arrived in unmarked vehicles. Their communications ran through an encrypted federal relay server that was completely isolated from the Department of Defense network. The reason for that isolation was not bureaucratic caution. It was survival, because at least 14 individuals inside Fort Carranza had direct, real-time access to base security channels. And those 14 individuals were not protecting the United States of America. They were on CJNG's payroll. At exactly 4:22 a.m., the order was given. 3 simultaneous breach teams hit the base's eastern supply corridor, the southwestern maintenance facility complex, and a restricted cargo hangar designated in base logs as Sector 9. Those logs described Sector 9 as a decommissioned vehicle storage unit, inactive since 2019, scheduled for demolition. That description was a lie constructed over 3 years of falsified paperwork, backdated inspection reports, and digital record manipulation so sophisticated it had passed 16 routine Defense Department audits without triggering a single flag. Inside Sector 9, agents in black moved fast and low, flashbangs detonating in sequence down the main corridor, the sound rolling across the empty base like a drumbeat. Soldiers in civilian clothes scrambled toward a rear exit, some carrying military-grade duffel bags and hard-shell transport cases. 3 attempted to engage. Federal agents neutralized them without fatalities. The rest surrendered. What agents found inside that hangar stopped experienced federal investigators cold. Stacked along the interior walls from floor to ceiling were sealed military surplus cargo containers, each stenciled with maintenance supply designations. Inside those containers were vacuum-sealed packages of pure fentanyl powder. Compressed fentanyl pills in pharmaceutical-style packaging, crystallized methamphetamine in heat-sealed bricks, and in the rear of the facility, behind a false wall of steel shelving bolted into the concrete floor, was something no one fully expected: a secondary command room. Climate-controlled, running on a separate power circuit that fed from a buried cable connected to the base's reserve grid. Inside that room were encrypted servers, satellite uplink hardware, laminated logistics maps of every major highway corridor between Laredo and Chicago, and 3 steel briefcases chained to an anchor bolt in the floor. When those briefcases were opened by DIA Technical Units 40 minutes later, agents found authorization documents, internal cartel logistics files, and a digital signature chain, encoded but ultimately crackable, that linked every single shipment that had passed through Sector 9 back to a single authorizing identity. 2-star General Harlan Whitfield Bryce, United States Army, Commander, Fort Carranza Installation Command. The general was arrested at his on-base residence at 5:03 a.m., while still in his sleeping clothes. He said nothing. He did not have to. The evidence spoke with the volume of a detonation. 7:44 a.m. FBI Cyber Forensics Command, San Antonio Federal Building. By morning, the encrypted servers from Sector 9 were fully connected to the Bureau's forensic analysis grid. Lead cyber investigators worked in shifts of 4, cycling through decryption layers that CA&G's technical operatives had constructed over what analysis would later confirm was a 3-year architecture build. This was not a simple password wall. This was a multi-tier encryption fortress designed by individuals who understood federal forensic protocol well enough to build specifically against it. They cracked the first tier in under 2 hours. What appeared on the central analysis screen was not just a cartel ledger. It was an operational blueprint, a command and control diagram of staggering complexity and breathtaking audacity. Federal analysts would later name what they saw Operation Scorpion Gate. The Chung network operating out of Fort Carranza was not a smuggling side project. It was the centerpiece of a continental logistics architecture that had been running, essentially undisturbed, since 2021. The shell company network alone covered 4 countries, 17 ghost corporations registered in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming with names like Meridian Freight Solutions LLC, Western Agricultural Partners Inc., and Solaris Transport Holdings, sham charitable foundations with process donations used to launder cartel cash. A restaurant chain in South Texas with 42 locations that served real food to real customers while processing an average of $600,000 per week in cartel revenue. A green energy infrastructure firm that had received federal grant funding and whose truck convoys moved between Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado without triggering a single way station check, because those way stations were shut down for scheduled maintenance every time a cartel convoy passed. Every single time. For 3 years, without exception. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and the United Arab Emirates processed the excess. Qing's financial architects moved money in segments calibrated to stay below international reporting thresholds, routing transfers through as many as 9 intermediary accounts before landing in clean holding positions. The estimated total laundered through the Fort Carranza network over its operational life was $2.3 billion. But the money was not even the worst part. Analysts pulled the logistics routing files and found the full scope of what had been moving through Sector 9, not just fentanyl, not just methamphetamine. Human trafficking routes, too. Migrant smuggling corridors that ran from the Rio Grande's interior crossing points directly to staging houses in Laredo, San Antonio, and Houston. The same military infrastructure used to protect cartel drug shipments had been used to shield human cargo. The same falsified patrol grids that cleared highways for narcotics convoys had been used to open lanes for migrant smuggling transports, people packed into refrigerated trucks with no water, no ventilation, and no guarantee of survival. The files showed that General Bryce had not stumbled into this arrangement. He had built it. He had identified Fort Carranza as a potential hub in 2020, initiated the first contact with CJing intermediaries through a civilian contractor the following spring, and methodically converted the installation's logistical infrastructure into a narco-military operation over the course of 3 years. He had recruited compromised personnel with precision. He had identified soldiers with financial vulnerabilities, personal legal problems, or existing cartel connections through family or previous residents, and he had approached them quietly, one by one, building his cartel-loyal unit inside a United States Army installation. This was not corruption. This was command-level collusion. An act of war against the country he had spent 31 years in uniform, pretending to defend. And the files made something else chillingly clear. Fort Carranza was not the only installation in play. Scorpion Gate had expansion phase documentation. 4 additional military and federal installations, locations redacted but traceable through coordinate metadata, were listed as Phase 2 integration targets. General Bryce was not planning to stop. He was planning to grow. To construct a network of cartel-infiltrated military installations across the southern border that would have made Qing not just the most powerful drug cartel in North America, but effectively untouchable by conventional law enforcement, permanently shielded by American military infrastructure. The operation had barely begun. What came next was federal judgment at scale. 3:15 a.m. The following morning. FBI Southwest Regional Command Center, San Antonio. The command center occupied the top floor of a federal building that had been locked down since midnight. On the central tactical screen, a digital map of Texas glowed with 47 red markers pulsing like warning lights. Each marker represented a CJNG-linked location tied to the Scorpion Gate network. Safe houses, distribution warehouses, transit hubs, financial processing locations, human trafficking staging houses, communications relay points, and 3 secondary drug supply facilities that the cartel had established as backup infrastructure in case Fort Carranza was ever compromised. They had prepared for exposure. They had not prepared for this. Strike Force Scorpion Gate launched at 4 a.m. flat. Over 1,400 federal agents committed simultaneously across the state of Texas. DIA Rapid Assault Units, FBI Tactical Teams, ICE enforcement and removal operations, SWAT units from 12 federal districts, DOS Homeland Security investigation teams embedded with each major strike element, U.S. Army military police units operating under direct federal warrant authority to assist with base-adjacent targets, 2 US-60 Black Hawk helicopters circling above each of the 3 highest priority targets, a network of D-8's aerial surveillance drones maintaining continuous overwatch on highway corridors connecting the 47 locations to ensure no cartel convoy could extract personnel or cargo once the operation began. At 4:06 a.m., a DIA strike team hit a CJNG-operated drug superlab hidden inside a refrigeration processing facility in a Laredo industrial district. The lab occupied the entirety of the building's lower level, accessible through a floor hatch concealed beneath industrial shelving. Inside, agents found active methamphetamine production equipment, 1,500 kilograms of cocaine in vacuum-sealed bricks, and a fentanyl pill-pressing operation running 3 machines simultaneously. 6 cartel chemists and 8 armed guards were taken into custody. 4 guards chose to engage. None escaped. At 4:09 a.m., ICE enforcement teams converged on a ranch property 20 miles northwest of Eagle Pass that the Scorpion Gate files had identified as CJNG's primary human trafficking transit house for the western Texas corridor. 41 migrants were found inside, held in conditions of severe deprivation. 3 cartel handlers were arrested. 2 more attempted to flee in an SUV and were stopped by a federal perimeter unit half a mile down the road. At 4:14 a.m., FBI tactical units breached a mansion in the Hill Country outside San Antonio registered to a shell company and used by senior CJNG logistics coordinators as a regional command residence. Inside, agents seized $38 million in cash, stored in a modified basement vault, 3 encrypted laptop computers, 2 satellite phones, a high-end communication server, and 4 individuals identified as senior CJNG cartel members with outstanding U.S. federal indictments. All 4 surrendered without resistance, which was notable because CJNG's reputation was built on anything but surrender. The evidence already gathered had apparently made the calculation quite clear. At 4:31 a.m., a joint DIA and FBI team descended on a warehouse complex in El Paso that Scorpion Gate files listed as the cartel's primary Texas distribution hub. The complex had been operating as a legitimate freight and logistics business for 4 years. 32 CJE-affiliated individuals were arrested inside, including 2 former U.S. Border Patrol agents who had been on the cartel payroll for over 2 years and had used their DA system access to manipulate patrol scheduling across an entire sector of the Texas border. Agents also discovered a drug tunnel entrance concealed beneath the warehouse floor, a reinforced passage running 160 meters to a structure on the Mexican side that had already been raided simultaneously by DIA liaisons working with Mexican federal authorities. By 10:30 a.m., 43 of the 47 red markers on the command center map had been cleared. The underworld had taken more damage in 6 hours than it had in the previous 6 years. The corruption ran deeper than the buildings. When forensic investigators began working through the seized servers, patrol logs, internal communications, and financial transaction records recovered from across the 47 Scorpion Gate locations, what emerged was not simply a picture of soldiers who had gone bad. It was a picture of a parallel enforcement system, constructed with military precision, that had been operating invisibly inside the legitimate one. 22 Border Patrol agents across 3 Texas sectors had been receiving monthly cartel payments in cash delivered through one of the CJNG restaurant chain's locations. Payments averaged between $4,000 and $11,000 per month, depending on the sensitivity of the access being sold. In return, patrol grids in their sectors were subtly distorted. Not eliminated, that would have been too obvious. Just quietly shifted. Adjusted. moved just far enough that the cartel's primary corridor routes maintained a reliable window of operational freedom, measured and calibrated over months of data that the cartel's own logistics intelligence tracked in real time. 3 judges across South Texas had received financial transfers traceable through multiple shell company layers back to Scorpion Gate accounts. The transfers were structured as legal consulting fees paid through a sham law firm. In return, federal records showed a pattern of reduced sentencing, declined warrant extensions, and dismissed cases involving individuals connected to CJNG's Texas operation over a period of 18 months. One serving Texas state legislator, Representative David Olano of the fictional 38th District, had received campaign financing through a network of sham donors connected to Meridian Freight Solutions, the primary Ching shell company. His office had submitted formal complaints about multiple federal enforcement operations in his district to the Department of Justice, complaints that investigators now suspected were deliberate interference designed to create bureaucratic delay around investigations that were getting close to Scorpion Gate infrastructure. Senior officers inside the base's own internal security division had systematically ensured that inspection requests for Sector 9 were deprioritized, rerouted, or administratively buried. One security sergeant, Master Sergeant Dwayne Calumet, had personally altered digital access logs for Sector 9 17 times over a 22-month period. He was arrested at his off-base home at 5:45 a.m., with $230,000 in cash found in a sealed duffel bag inside his detached garage. Honest agents who had served alongside these men described the arrests with a particular kind of grief. Not shock, exactly. Something quieter and harder. The feeling of looking at a face you trusted and realizing the face was a mask. Several veteran DIA investigators described it as losing your foundation. Because it was not just about the individuals. It was about what their actions had made possible. Every delayed patrol was a convoy that moved. Every shifted grid was a shipment that landed. Every buried inspection was a super lab that ran another night. The real cost of the corruption was not measured in dollars or in verdicts. It was measured in the fentanyl that crossed the border while the badge looked away. Every pill that ended up in a teenager's hand. Every family that got the worst phone call of their lives. Every neighborhood quietly hollowed out by a poison that arrived in a truck that should have been stopped. The badge will be rebuilt from the ground up. It has to be. Zoom out for a moment. Look at the map. Because what federal analysts confirmed over the following weeks of investigation was that Fort Carranza was a hub and a system that spanned far beyond Texas. The Scorpion Gate Network's logistics architecture connected to CJNG distribution infrastructure in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, and Southern California. The same trucking contractors that moved cartel product out of Texas were operating in 6 states under various shell company identities, all traceable back to the same offshore financial architecture. The same green energy firm that had received federal grant funding and whose convoys were never stopped at Texas way stations had subsidiary operations with similar route privileges established in Arizona and New Mexico. The cartel was not smuggling into America. It had constructed logistics corridors inside America, running through companies, institutions, and in the most devastating case yet uncovered, military installations that were effectively invisible to standard interdiction. Investigators calculating the full operational throughput of the Scorpion Gate network estimated that at its peak capacity, the system could move approximately 2 tons of narcotics per week through its combined corridors without triggering a federal alert, not because the system was perfectly designed, because it had been deliberately shielded by the people responsible for detecting it. And then there was the document that federal analysts referred to in internal briefings simply as the phase document. Recovered from General Bryce's private encrypted drive and requiring a 17-hour decryption effort, the phase document outlined a long-range operational vision that Ting's cartel leadership had apparently been developing in partnership with Bryce for over 2 years. Phase 1 had been Fort Carranza, a fully operational cartel logistics hub inside a U.S. military installation, generating secure transport infrastructure, law enforcement blind spots, and a corruption network capable of self-sustaining and self-protecting over the long term. Phase 2, as previously noted, involved 4 additional installation targets. Phase 3, which investigators described privately as reading like the most disturbing document any of them had ever seen in their careers, outlined a vision for transforming the entire southern border military zone into what the document called a sustained operational environment. a region in which cartel logistics infrastructure was so deeply integrated into legitimate military and federal systems that no single law enforcement action could meaningfully disrupt it. A shadow architecture that would outlast any individual cartel leader, any individual corrupt general, any individual administration. Not a cartel operating inside America, a cartel that had become structurally indistinguishable from a portion of America's own defense infrastructure. Let that settle. They were not trying to infiltrate the system. They were trying to become part of it. Permanently. Irremovably. By design. The system was being redesigned for a cartel future, not just infiltrated for a cartel present. There are names behind every number in this story that you will never know. The 17.9 tons of fentanyl seized from Fort Carranza represented enough poison to flood the streets of every major American city simultaneously. Federal public health analysts asked to contextualize that quantity described it as a mass casualty event in compressed form, waiting to be detonated across the country, one pill at a time. Ching's fentanyl operation had already, by conservative DIA estimates, contributed to over 14,000 overdose deaths in the United States in the previous calendar year alone. 14,000 people. Not statistics. People with families, with histories, with futures that ended because a general in a uniform decided his career and his greed were worth more than his oath. The cocaine and methamphetamine seized across the 47 Scorpion Gate locations represented supply chains that had been feeding addiction across Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Illinois for years. The human trafficking routes that ran through the same corridors had processed an estimated 460 migrants in the previous 18 months. Some arrived safely at destinations in the interior of the country. Some did not. The ones who did not never made the news. Power does not always announce itself with violence and explosions. Sometimes it announces itself with silence. With a signature on a falsified inspection report. With a patrol grid shifted 3 miles east, with a maintenance closure that happens to correspond with a convoy's scheduled passage. With a general in a uniform standing in a command room at midnight, authorizing another shipment of poison to roll through the gates of a United States Army installation and into the country he swore to protect. That is how empires of corruption are built. Quietly, methodically, behind the walls of institutions that the rest of us trusted without question, because we believed the people inside them had made the same choice we would have made. Most of them did. 59 of them did not. General Harlan Whitfield Bryce faces federal charges including conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, bribery, obstruction of justice, and treason against the United States. He faces the possibility of spending the remainder of his life in federal prison. The soldiers arrested alongside him face charges commensurate with their individual roles in the Scorpion Gate network. The judges, the legislators, the border agents, the security officers, the investigation is ongoing, and federal prosecutors have stated publicly that the indictments issued so far represent the beginning, not the conclusion, of accountability for Operation Scorpion Gate. The Zhengji cartel continues to operate. Its leadership remains largely intact across the border, but Scorpion Gate, the crown jewel of its American infrastructure strategy, has been destroyed. Its logistics corridors are severed, its shell company network is frozen. Its corrupt enforcement shield has been stripped away, layer by layer, by the investigators who spent years building the case that ended in the fog at 4:17 a.m. On a Tuesday morning in March, this story is a warning. Not about one general, not about one cartel, about what happens when ambition meets desperation and finds a system willing to look away. About how deeply an enemy can embed itself inside the architecture of trust before anyone sounds the alarm loud enough to be heard. The alarm has been sounded now. Whether anyone is still listening is a different question. If you watched this far, tap like so this story reaches the people who need to hear it. Comment Scorpion Gate below if you believe accountability has to start somewhere. Share this so the next story can be told. And remember, what you just watched is a fictional dramatization. Every name, every character, every official depicted is entirely invented. But the warnings embedded in this story are real. The tactics described are drawn from documented real-world patterns. The cost is real. The fentanyl is real. The families are real. The silence is real. Stay informed. Stay engaged. And never stop asking who is really guarding the gate.